We are ready to get started, so I will call the meeting to order. We'll do a quick roll call. Councilmember Hedikaris. Here. Councilmember Ravel.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Virtually, and then myself. So we have a quorum with all members being present. We are going to convene into, or first I'll do a call for public comment before we very quickly convene into executive session to approve executive session minutes from March 7th. If there's no one for public comment, then I will entertain a motion to convene briefly into executive session to review the March 7th, 2022 minutes under, I'm forgetting, is it section C, is it 21? Okay.
I so move.
Moved by Councilmember Ravel, seconded by Councilmember Hedikaris. All those, or a roll call on this. Councilmember Hedikaris. Aye. Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Myself is an aye. We will quickly convene into exec, and we should be back out in less than 5 minutes, hopefully.
Councilmember Reed,
Yes.
with Nicola being off this evening, is there someone that's available to do an audio recording of the exec session?
Oh, yeah, I can take care of that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
We're having an exec to approve exec minutes, and so now we'll have to. It's an endless trail of executive sessions. All right, thank you. Okay, that brings us back to our regular business. May I have a motion to reconvene? Do we need to reconvene? Good to go. Okay. All right, so that brings us to our regular order of business. I seek a motion on HS1. May I have a motion on item HS1?
I'll move approval of the minutes of our July 13th meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second moved by Councilmember Ravel, seconded by Councilmember Burns. This is for the approval of the regular meeting minutes of July 13th. All those in favor?
Wait. I have a correction.
Yes.
I was not present at that meeting, and nor was Peter Braithwaite.
Okay. May I have a motion to?
So I move to strike, to amend the.
To reflect the absence
to reflect that.
Councilmember Braithwaite.
Yeah, neither Councilmember Braithwaite, no longer Councilmember Braithwaite, nor I was present.
Second.
Okay. Those minutes will be corrected. All those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
And then to the main motion, all those in favor of approving the minutes as amended?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain since I was not.
Recording in progress.
Oh, sorry, we are now recording. We just approved the minutes of the July 13th meeting as amended, and we returned from executive session. All right, may I have a motion on item HS2? This would be approval of the release of the executive session minutes from March 7th, 2022.
I move approval.
Moved by Councilmember Ravel, seconded by Councilmember Hedikaris. Is there any discussion on these minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great, the ayes have it, and the motion passes. We are I will do a quick call for public comment again, and then we will move on to our main order of business. So is there anyone, still no one for public comment? Okay, we will continue moving on. I'm going to change the order of business a bit today because Councilmember Burns is requesting that we discuss item HS3 and I guess HS3, which is a two-part resolution. Yes.
Two resolutions.
Well, two resolutions, yeah, two resolutions under HS3. So may I have a motion on that?
Yeah, so moved. I don't have it in front. I'm trying to.
Oh, okay, Councilmember Burns is moving item HS3, which is Resolution 67R22, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with Fuse Corp. Concerning the Reimagining Public Safety Committee and low priority 911 calls. And then separately, also within that is Resolution 68R22, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with LEAP concerning the Reimagining Public Safety Committee and low priority 911 calls. Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilmember Heracles. Okay, Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, we can start with a presentation from LEAP. I believe we have Lionel King and here to kick us off, and then he can introduce his colleagues. And Luke sent me a text and said that he is unable to hear online, so I don't even know if Lionel can hear me.
Okay, Anderson is coming in. Okay, is the audio restored online? Yes.
All
Okay.
good, thank you.
Okay, so to recap, we just approved the minutes.
Recording stop. Recording in progress.
Okay, just to recap, we approved the minutes. We are now, we have adjusted the order of business a bit. We are on HS3, which is the first item that we were dealing with other than the minutes, which is Resolution 67R22, as well as Resolution 68R22. And I kicked it over to Councilmember Burns, who is introducing the folks from LEAP. Oh, yeah, and we'll call for public comment again. I called for public comment earlier, but we'll call for it again shortly.
So to kick it off, we have LEAP here. Lionel King should be on the call, and he'll here to present, and he can introduce us to his other colleagues on the line. Lionel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, it is an absolute pleasure to be here with Evanston, and LEAP is excited to kind of discuss this work that we hope to do in Evanston. And so I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. Maybe Amos, you can jump in there, and then Mike, and we can get started.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Amos Irwin, Program Director with the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, and I'm calling in from Baltimore, Maryland. Mike?
I'm Mike Hilliard. I'm a member of LEAP and one of its speakers. I'm also a retired major from the Baltimore Police Department. In my last position, I ran the city's 911 center and police dispatch.
Well, and I am Lionel King, and believe it or not, I'm calling in from Johannesburg, South Africa. I am a native New Orleanian, though, and that will never change. I am a program specialist here with LEAP, and again, we're excited to kind of discuss the work that LEAP does and the work that we want to do here in Evanston. I'm going to ask, is it possible that we can share screens? And if so, I would like to ask Amos to share his screen. Great, thank you so much. All righty, so I'm going to let Major Mike Hilliard take the first portion of his presentation, and I'll jump in on the latter end.
So thank you. LEAP is a nonprofit advocacy organization with a cadre of over 250 law enforcement officers, judges, and prosecutor speakers that travel the country advocating for intelligent criminal justice reform. Most germane to today's discussion is our advocacy of the community responder model. Amos, could you go to the second slide, please? LEAP has been at the front of the intelligent criminal justice reform for 20 years. One of our major focuses is restoring trust between the police and the community because, as you know, law enforcement can't be as effective if people won't talk to the police. Another focus is dealing with the fact that police are asked to wear 40 different hats, and every year they put another one on the police's heads. We want to identify the issues that don't need to be on the police's shoulders so the police can focus on public safety priorities. As many of you know, police departments are already overwhelmed as they are short-staffed and expanded responsibilities. We see community responder programs as a way of relieving some of the pressure from the police and allowing them to focus on more serious crimes. Next slide, please, Amos. LEAP is a nonprofit advocacy organization, again, with over 40 in criminal intelligence we're doing. Most germane to today's discussion is our advocacy of the community responder model. As LEAP has been at the forefront of intelligent criminal justice for 20 years, one of our major focuses is restoring trust between the police and community because, you know, we can't be effective. Another focus is dealing with the fact that police are asked to wear 40 different hats. We want to identify the issues that don't need to be addressed by the police. As many of you know, police departments are overwhelmed with short staffing and with expanded responsibilities. We see community responder programs as a way of relieving some of the pressure from the police and allowing them to focus on more serious crimes. Here are a few cities with community responder programs. Next slide, please, Amos. Many other cities have some form of expanded response, while many others are currently developing programs. It is important to note that Cahoots has been around for 30 years and inspired many of the models. In fact, a police officer left Eugene and became chief in Olympia, Washington. He was so impressed with the Cahoots program that he started CREW, or CRU team, in Olympia. This shows police have supported the idea of a community response since the inception of the idea. Next slide. LEAP has already received calls for service data from Evanston and begun comparing results to what we have seen in similar cities. These numbers show the ranking of how common these call types are in several cities we've worked in. For example, check well-being is the second most common reason people call 911 and get a police response in Evanston, and it's the fourth in Amherst, the third in Dayton, and the first in Brooklyn Center. Every community is different, and looking at call data allows us to see why the public in Evanston is requesting assistance and where that would be appropriate for community responders. Evanston has a leg up on other cities because Trilogy's first response alternative crisis team, FACT, is already responding to mental health calls that come into their dedicated hotline. And Trilogy is expanding to 24/7 by September. With good publicity, Trilogy will start receiving some of the check well-being calls, which are currently the city's #2 police call for service. Unfortunately, under the current system, Trilogy isn't getting forwarded any 911 calls. If the public calls 911 for a well-being check, they're still getting a police response. And Trilogy isn't handling any of the other call types on this list, which are being handled by community responder programs in other jurisdictions. I'll turn it over to Lionel to discuss what LEAP does exactly when we work with an individual city.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll go over this as briefly and succinctly as possible, but I'm long-winded, so please, guys, bear with me. So LEAP provides expert advice to assist cities as they explore
Lionel.
conceptual. Yes?
If you wouldn't mind going back to that previous slide, I just want to be annoying and just highlight, because I've received I've had a few conversations, and I just want to be clear here that, again, our current program, and after they're done presenting, I'll talk a little bit about the data we received from Trilogy that covered, I want to say, April through June. And you'll see it from the data they provided us. Again, they are not responding to nuisance complaints and other complaints out here. So I understand people might be confused and think that we're trying to duplicate efforts, but we do not have a full community responder model in Evanston. That was initially our intention, and we stopped pursuing that in order to see what we would get out of Trilogy. And I think some people may be satisfied with what we're getting. I'm certainly satisfied with what they're doing, but my intention as someone who has probably double the nuisance complaints in the 5th Ward than any other ward, am really focused on continuing our journey to achieving a full community responder program. So I want to just highlight early on why we're here, why I'm here, and why I invited LEAP and Fuse, or really LEAP, in terms of the community responder model that they have had some success implementing in other jurisdictions. Sorry about that, Lionel. Please continue.
Oh, much appreciated, Councilman.
Councilman, if I may, I thank you for your comment. And what it brought to mind to me is you are appropriately looking at this from an elected official and community model. As I look at it from a law enforcement position, one of the things I see, and it goes back to what we talked about in staffing, is to my mind, there's not a department in this nation that is fully staffed or is able to keep itself fully staffed. So this provides an out-of-the-box way to take work away from the police that they're really not that well trained to do, and it gives them the opportunity to do the proactive policing they need to do to prevent crime and identify criminal problems within a community and resolve them. Sorry, Lionel. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you guys both for that valuable information. And just to get back to what LEAP does. So in phase 1, LEAP does a needs assessment. LEAP conducts both qualitative and quantitative examinations of 911 call narrative data to determine which call types and the percentage of calls that would most likely be eligible for community responders. This two-pronged approach starts with identifying eligible calls based on the call narrative and not just the categorized descriptions of the calls. So the call narratives are the notes taken by 911 dispatch operators once the call for service has been received. The narratives contain more detailed information regarding the circumstances surrounding the calls for service. Based on the information recorded by the 911 dispatch in the call narrative, calls are then categorized into call types. Call types are the way that dispatch codes 911 calls. These categories are often broad and often don't capture the essence of the calls for service. For a real life example of this is LEAP analyzed some calls for service in Atlanta, and many of the calls were coded as fight in progress, which would indicate that there was a physical altercation. However, our examination of the call narratives found that often these calls were that were coded fight in progress were actually for incidents such as a homeless person in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant, or an individual playing their car stereo loudly and disturbing their neighbors. These incidents were not actual fights at all, but this fight in progress was kind of a catch-all term for many different incidents. This is why LEAP finds it imperative to conduct narrative analysis. So also in phase 1, LEAP conducts conversations with police, dispatch, and other system stakeholders to kind of gain a detailed understanding of the existing processes and programs that exist in the city. So finally, in phase one, LEAP researches existing community responder programs. Over the years, LEAP has created this repository of data on community responder programs, including the way the programs are designed, the type of responders, the budgets, the cost savings, the types of calls that responders handle, the hours of operations, the chain of command, including which departments the programs are housed, and also the type of training responders receive. In phase two, LEAP works with community members and stakeholders to help make informed decisions about the program's design. LEAP will provide information via meeting agendas that cover topics such as the call types, 911 dispatch process, the hours, the budget, referral services, as well as the timeline. Also, LEAP will engage police and dispatch to ensure that their voices are heard throughout the entire process. LEAP will address the concerns of safety from a police perspective, and our in-house law expert, Lisa, is able to address the concerns of liability from a legal perspective. And based on that community-led process, LEAP produces an in-depth, detailed, bespoke preliminary report that outlines the structure of a program, including the number of responders, the type of responders, responder qualifications, the type of training, possible training organizations, hours of operation, types of calls that responders would handle, the budget, and program placement. This report kind of becomes the blueprint for implementation. In fact, in Amherst, the program manager there over the CREST program called our preliminary report his Bible as it relates to the program. So once the city has committed to implementing a community responder model and it's hired a program manager, in phase three, LEAP continues to provide advice and guidance to assist the program manager in understanding the recommendations all the way through program launch. Amos, can you go to the next slide for me? So LEAP will work with, I'm sorry about that, my computer's giving me all kind of noises here. LEAP will work with community stakeholders, including the police, dispatch, and Trilogy to understand the current city dynamics and keep stakeholders involved and informed throughout the process. LEAP will also work with the Reimagining Public Safety Committee on expanded response programs to ensure that the development is a community-led and community-designed process. LEAP will use the information gathered from community stakeholders and our own repository of information on programs across the country to formulate a detailed needs assessment specifically designed for Evanston. Next slide, please. In other communities, city officials often ask, the community, do you guys want a community responder program? And of course, the community says yes. Then they kind of go into this back room and they come out a few months later with this program design. LEAP, on the other hand, we feel that it's important and it's imperative that the community and city stakeholders be in the driver's seat to make informed decisions on meaningful aspects of the program so that they can be truly tailored to Evanston. In the second phase of the scope, LEAP will act as a project management team, organizing agendas, meeting with working group chairs, presenting content, manage the timeline, and correspond with stakeholders and shape this these community-led recommendations into implementable action steps. And of course, LEAP will also provide ongoing advice as necessary to the Fuse Fellow to kind of assist with this successful implementation of this community-led design in its final stage. I know I just said a whole lot, so I'm sure that you guys have questions. So I put in a slide that said questions, if you don't. And then that is the presentation.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Councilmember Burns.
LEAP appreciate Lionel and Amos and Major Hilliard. Appreciate your presentation and your attendance during this meeting. We appreciate all your efforts. And I last night stayed up a bit to get a sense of to get a better understanding for myself of the differences between the I think it's called the Emergency Alternatives Committee. I always get it. Alternative Emergency Response Committee. The Reimagining Public Safety Committee, and I think there's one other. That might be the two. And you know, from looking at the definition of the Alternative Emergency Response Subcommittee, it says responsible for developing a non-police response to members of the community who are in need of immediate support, not including life-saving medical situations. The subcommittee will review similar programs around the U.S., assess local needs, develop response protocols, develop staff qualification and ideal schedule, and make a program recommendation. This may be a new internal program or outsourced via RFP to the City Council, including projected costs. In addition, this subcommittee will continue to convene to review program implementation, track progress, review outcomes, and make necessary recommendations for program adjustments and long-term adoption. And so there is a component of this proposal that we have that includes creating a working group. And because we already have a working group, which I just described their kind of purpose and reason for existing, I don't think we need to create a working group here. I did, however, highlight some things that I think LEAP can do, and one of them is, the first one is acquire and begin analyzing calls for service data. So I look back at the first meeting of the Alternative 911 Response Subcommittee, and this was October 20th, 2020, and the data that is being used is really basic data that tells you, you know, okay, for Ward 1, you know, here are the 911 calls for service, and it breaks them down: check well-being, theft, nuisance complaint, parking complaint, and probably, I don't know, two dozen or more other service calls, and it ranks them from, you know, the highest amount of calls to the least amount of calls, and but it doesn't go any further than that. And so, again, this is something that might have been missed in the presentation, but acquire and begin analyzing calls for service data. Really, the data that LEAP is talking about is the narrative data, because this data tells you why the call was made, but it doesn't tell you anything about what happened once the police officer was dispatched and arrived. And that's the really important data that tells you what was the nature of the call. And once we have a better sense of the nature of the call, we'll have a better sense of the appropriate response, right? Do we need a police response for some of the nuisance calls that we see, or is there, or can we have a community responder, or what LEAP would call a credible messenger, who's a community member who's trained to handle those situations? And really digging into the narrative data from these service calls is what LEAP is kind of trained and able to do. And we've already done the work of, and Amos, I know you work closely with me on this, so if you can remind me what agreement we have with the Evanston Police Department, but there's already an agreement between the Evanston Police Department and LEAP to share this data. The contract has already been signed, or the agreement, I should say, has already been signed and executed, and we're ready to go. But that is an area that I think LEAP is specifically trained to do, that I don't think, what do they call it, scope creeps into what, you know, the committee is doing. The other thing is scheduling and beginning regular meetings with police and dispatch. So we heard from Major Hilliard that they really are a group of law enforcement, both former and current judges, prosecutors, et cetera. I would imagine that they have a lot more credibility when in speaking to law enforcement in particular about, as Major Hilliard phrased it, intelligent reform. And so I think having LEAP there alongside community and council to have those discussions with our sworn officers is important. I said this during the panel discussion that we had a few days ago when we were for the police chief candidates, and I said it's almost not worth pursuing many of the reforms that we're considering if our sworn officers aren't fully behind it, because at every turn, if they're not behind it, it will be undermined, right? Every beat walk, every ride along with your colleague, if you're not supporting something, you're going to be talking mess about it, of course, as we all do. You're going to let out some stress and say, oh man, I don't know what they think they're doing, and the same can be true even for us up here if we don't have complete buy-in. And so I think having LEAP and people like Major Hilliard and others that they have as part of their membership will help us to be able to build the type of support we need in our police department for these reforms, along with 100% hiring a permanent police chief that is also fully behind and supportive of what we're trying to do. And then I'll just go quickly through the rest. Calls outside of the realm of behavioral health, so really helping us to think about how to expand our community responder model beyond behavioral health and into noise complaints, neighbor disputes, juvenile disturbances, landlord-tenant disputes, trespassing, loitering. Some of these calls our problem-solving team officers who were recently reassigned to patrol were working on. And so what a great time to be thinking about, okay, clearly we need the problem-solving team officers on the beat, right, patrolling the community. And so what a great time to think about, all right, is there another team of, again, credible messengers that could serve in that capacity to respond to these calls, to make sure that whether we have a police shortage or not, that these issues are not going addressed and they're given the time and the attention that they need. And then also it talks about no knock and announce and other warrants, that they can also make recommendations on how to reduce unnecessary high-risk police contact. LEAP will assist Evanston in reviewing current police policy and practices in the following areas. They mentioned low-level and pretextual traffic stops for equipment issues. I think we have a committee that is already working on that. Consent searches for vehicle stops, police vehicle stop data and collection. The fourth one, I think, is one that we should potentially consider, which is what I just mentioned, no knock. And then also the research on existing models. Again, they are working alongside jurisdictions in implementing these community responder models, as opposed to researching it as a third-party observer, and essentially. And so I think we can really come up with some much stronger recommendations and receive much more meaningful and helpful guidance from LEAP, as opposed to a body that again does not work in implementing these type of models across the country on a regular basis. And that's not to say that they wouldn't play a role. I just think LEAP's recommendations can be funneled to the committee so that they can do their work of advising the council on how to expand the program. And then lastly, provide ongoing support for implementation. And so you probably can't tell if you haven't read through all this, but that isn't everything that they have offered to do. That actually is a scaled back version. And so what I would ask the committee, and we can discuss this more, is if for LEAP we can do a not to exceed contract with them up to a certain amount, because again, I don't think we need all these services, but I do think there's some things here that would be useful. And sorry for the long explanation, and that's all for now, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Ravel.
So, a question of, I guess, clarification. So we already have an agreement with LEAP to do analysis of the 911 calls? I mean, there's some, you mentioned it.
Yeah,
We
Amos,
already
can
have a
you
contract?
explain it? And we have a contract so that we can do it. We don't have, there's
It wasn't a paid.
It's not a paid,
Yeah.
there's no transaction. It was ahead of these conversations. We needed to have an agreement to allow it to happen. But Amos, explain it, please, better than I can.
Oh, sure. That's what I would call a data privacy agreement. So it's not, it doesn't state LEAP is going to perform X and Y services, for X dollars. It says LEAP is going to acquire this data, which has some, personally identifiable information, and LEAP is going to protect the data in this way and that way, so that the police and the city felt secure, giving us the data to be able to analyze. So that agreement has been completed, and we have the data. We don't have any agreement as far as, a contract to actually perform a certain analysis with the data. Hopefully that makes sense.
That was our free consultation. Now it's time to sign the contract and have the contractors come in and do the home repairs, so.
Okay. Well, I guess the most important thing that I want to make sure is clear is what the Alternative Emergency Response Committee was working on compared to what I think the Reimagining Public Safety Committee's been working on. The Alternative Emergency Response Committee was very much focused on the CAHOOTS model, which was providing an appropriate response for people with having a mental illness issue, a homelessness issue, or a substance use issue. It was not the broader community responder kind of issues that Councilmember Burns has just been describing. And I wholeheartedly agree that those are very important issues, and to come up with a community responder program that would address those. And so I guess I just think it would be helpful if we take away the program that the Alternative Emergency Response Committee has been working on, and that Trilogy is now implementing, is ready to go 24/7 at the end of the month. They've got a team of, well-trained mental health professionals, behavioral health professionals who are providing excellent service here in Evanston. The next step is getting our 911 dispatchers up to speed in terms of directly transferring calls to 911. Currently, what happens is, I think officers who are out in the field responding to a call, if the person they meet needs a behavioral health response, then the police officer calls Trilogy. So we're not yet involving our 911 dispatch. And I think my understanding from Trilogy is, so Trilogy's getting getting a big grant from the state. It's part of actually a whole nationwide effort to provide important, timely mental health response to residents who need it. And so so they've also launched a 988 suicide and crisis prevention phone number in July. And there's just all kinds of moving parts to try to address people who are experiencing a mental health crisis in particular. So I guess I would like to make sure that I'm very happy to keep talking about the community responder model that Councilmember Burns is talking about, but I think I really like to make sure that we're not lumping in the Trilogy mental health response into this broader community responder model. So that's sort of my opening comment. And so I guess, so we've mostly been talking about, just an amazing array of support and service and that LEAP is offering. And I guess my question is, why do we need a fuse fellow? I would think LEAP is offering to provide all the know-how, the expertise, the substantive expertise that's needed to develop a community responder, a broader community responder program. And I guess I'm quite happy to keep talking about, a relationship with LEAP. But I guess and we haven't talked about the fuse part yet, but I guess I'm not at all persuaded about the fuse part of all of this. So, that's my sort of initial thoughts.
Yeah, and we've separated both of these out because Fuse is also attending to talk about what the Fuse fellow would do. So we'll have that discussion shortly. I wanted to start with LEAP, but and to answer your first question, I see it as adding on to what we're doing. Early on, I introduced LEAP to Trilogy, and so we've had a conversation with them, and I think that whether the community responder model, along with the credible messengers, becomes its own thing, separate from Trilogy or not, it likely will. They are performing similar enough work to where I think there should be collaboration and communication between them. And so that's the reason why we've brought up Trilogy and talked to them. But in no way is this meant to replace the work that Trilogy is doing.
Right, but the Trilogy team is really has very different expertise compared to what I think you're talking about with
For
the
sure,
community
yeah.
responder, where you're going to want mediators and.
Right.
I mean, so it's, so in my mind, I mean, I'm happy to think of partnership and collaboration, but they really are two very different skilled sets of
Absolutely.
responders.
Yeah, and so I think we're in agreement. I just wanted to make sure I was addressing your concern that this is not meant to replace or disrupt or slow down anything that Trilogy is doing. If anything, it's just adding on to our response to different service calls and continuing our effort to find, when appropriate, alternatives for police response. Yeah.
Well, since this was moved as two resolutions in one, maybe let's go to the Fuse Fellow portion of this.
Oh, I didn't know both were, okay.
Unless you want to split it and vote on.
Although, were you also talking about an expanded LEAP?
I think you might be amending what is here.
I was amending it to actually reduce the amount of work that they would do, even if the I keep forgetting the name. Even if the alternative 911 response subcommittee wouldn't be the working group, I think it's likely that the reimagining public safety committee could act as that working group.
Right,
So
yeah,
I still
I
think
would
there's
say,
a way
yeah.
to reduce the amount of services that they have offered us
That LEAP
in
is
this
al- that
proposal.
LEAP is-
That LEAP has offered us, to be clear, not Fuse, but LEAP.
Okay.
And
Well,
so,
but they, boy, I mean, they outlined a lot of service that they would provide, I would think.
yeah.
I,
And some of it is some of it we've already done, or we have, like the working group, for example. That was a part of the service that we would have to compensate them to create a working group and to organize it. And I think we
guess-
already have
Right,
a
well,
working
I
group.
think the alternative response committee would have to be completely shift. I mean, the people on the committee are from Connections for the Homeless.
No, I understand.
Peer Services, organizations that work in the mental health, homelessness, and substance use area. So they aren't, I don't think that's the committee that you need for this community responder model.
Well, I mentioned that I think the Reimagining Public Safety Committee could be that working group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I'm sorry, I got confused.
No.
So just to be clear, do you want to split the motion and just deal with Fuse now and vote on that, and then?
We can do that.
Okay, so then if you want to if you just want to amend the motion and then you wanted to change the motion to a not to exceed amount?
Correct. Yeah, because I think between now and the 12th, we still need time. I've read off the things that I believe
The 12th of
should-
September, which would be the council
should
meeting.
continue the next council meeting where this will be official. So I read off I've identified services that I think we should move forward with. I still need to work with LEAP to figure out the costs, and we won't know that tonight. We'll know that at some point between now and the next meeting.
Okay, before we move on, I'm sorry.
I said one comment.
Councilmember Hadakatis.
So I think your amendment would just be to, where it says, yada, yada, will cost 25 to 35, you just put it as not to exceed X amount? Is that?
And yeah, if we can move forward X amount for now into the council meeting, because then we'll know exactly what it is,
So
whether
you
it's
don't want to say,
30,000.
okay.
I don't- you know, I want to talk to them first. I mean, my gut is saying it'll probably be around 30, but I want to have that conversation first. But I think we can move forward in a not to exceed, our intent to enter into a not to exceed contract with them. You know, that amount can be defined at the next council meeting.
If folks feel comfortable, yeah, so then feel free to make the motion.
Yeah, so that's my motion.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Burns, seconded by
I'll second it.
Councilmember Hadakatis. So the motion is to move forward just the right now, just the Fuse Fellow portion. of
LEAP.
I'm sorry, thank you. The LEAP portion of this in a dollar amount not to exceed an unknown amount.
Yes.
Okay. I guess all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it, and this moves forward to council in an unknown dollar amount. Okay, and then that brings us now, if now you can move the Fuse Fellow portion of that.
Yeah, I move a discussion on the resolution to
60, yeah.
approve a contract with a Fuse Fellow Incorporated, I think is the full name. I'm not sure.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Hadakatis. All right, do you want to have the Fuse Fellow, the Fuse
Yeah,
Fellows?
Nicole is here to provide. I think everyone here is also on the Planning and Development Committee. Were you here for the last meeting? Okay.
Yeah, he's virtual.
So, but maybe just a quick intro, and then we can get right into it. Nicole, if I can't see who's online, but I think Nicole is joining us from Fuse.
To know, we'd still appreciate your presence in person if you'd like, but Councilmember Hadakatis was able to make it today. Okay, we are ready to get started, so I will call the meeting to order. We'll do a quick roll call. Councilmember Hadakatis? Here. Councilmember Ravel?
Here.
Councilmember Burns?
Here.
Virtually, and then myself, so we have a quorum with all members being present. We are going to convene into, or first I'll do a call for public comment before we very quickly convene into executive session to approve executive session minutes from March 7th. If there's no one for public comment, then I will entertain a motion to convene briefly into executive session to review the March 7th, 2022 minutes under, I'm forgetting, is it section C, is it 21? Okay.
So I so move.
Moved by Councilmember Ravel, seconded by Councilmember Herricardis. All those, or a roll call on this. Councilmember Herricardis? Aye. Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Myself is an aye. We will quickly convene into exec, and we should be back out in less than 5 minutes, hopefully.
Councilmember Reed,
Yes.
with Nicola being off this evening, is there someone that's available to do an audio recording of the exec session?
Oh, yeah, I can take care of that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
We're having an exec to approve exec minutes, and so now we'll have to. It's an endless trail of executive sessions. All right, thank you.
Record.
And who haven't officially approved a contract to work with them yet. And so if it does not work out, we haven't signed anything yet, and all of that can be worked out. I will say, and I would encourage everyone just to read through the job description, but just to put it plainly, this person would be will work as a project manager and also a community and organizer for our reimagining public safety work. Allison has helped as much as she can, but her role really is to really support the council in all of our policy agenda and not one. And so we do not have a full-time staff member that is focusing on the success of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee, which has 3 separate working groups, all of which have their own agendas and eventually recommendations if we could have some support to get to them. We have the working group that I chair, Rethinking the Organizational Structure. We have, I believe, traffic and pedestrian enforcement, and then we have violence prevention, violence interruption strategies, and they have they have proposed some recommendations, but there will be others. And I think the reason why Mayor Biss has participated on these calls and I believe is generally supportive is he understands we don't have a full-time staff person supporting this work. This is a really important initiative, obviously, for the mayor. It was his first official act to create this committee, and I think all too often, not just what the city of Evanston does, but probably most cities, is we take on really, we claim as though we want to do transformational work and make a big impact, and then we have like 1 or 0 staff members dedicated to it, and then we wonder why it never quite reaches the expectation that we all have. The same is true for our housing work, which is why we're working on the Fuse Fellow in that area. The same is true for our sustainability work. We have this really big thing that we're trying to implement, and we only have Kira there. So again, all of this is about matching, our staff with what we say we want to do in these areas. That's all this really is across the board, whether it's climate action, whether it's housing, whether it's our public safety work. And so, again, fundamentally, this person would be a staff person for the Reimagining Public Safety Committee that will support all the working groups in our efforts.
Thank you. I will chime in if there's no one else on the committee that wants to speak at this moment. As someone, I serve on the Reimagining Public Safety Committee, and I serve on all of the subcommittees. And so I certainly see the need for this position to support the work across the various committees, including, but certainly not limited to, the one that Councilmember Burns chairs. I think that's why Mayor Biss supports this. I think he's, seeing the frustration, and again, as Councilmember Burns stated, hitting that, metaphorical brick wall, not being able to move forward because of just limitations in staff resources to move this work forward. And so I am also supportive of these funds, and I've been able to be a fly on the wall in many of the conversations, including today. And so I think this makes sense. Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I guess I'm uncomfortable with this big price tag for this unknown person. I'm very impressed with the expertise that LEAP would bring to this important work, but the Fuse proposal is just much too general and vague, and if what we're looking for is a staff person to help support the public safety committee, I guess I would say we could do it for less than $180,000.
And so would you mind, Nicole, breaking down because 180,000 is not just the salary. And so I think it costs us the same to do it. Plus, if I'm being honest, we don't have a great track record of hiring right now. And, we have plenty of vacant positions that we've been trying to fill for months now. So I think part of working with Fuse is they do have a track record of finding executive level professionals with at least 15 years of experience to assume these roles. Nicole can talk about how successful they've been in other places. But
I just want to know from the call earlier, I think they said they had 30 or like 40 or 50, 45 or 50 people apply for this. I was going to ask them if they want to start running we don't need it now, but in the future we might need to come to Fuse to run our city manager searches and other search processes that we have, because it seems like they're doing a phenomenal job advertising this. But
yeah, Nicole, if you could kind of break down the 180,000 and then also talk about kind of the recruitment process for Fuse and how that all works.
Sure, and I'll just start with the last one so that I can give a very big shout out to my recruiting team colleagues who do a phenomenal job. And so one of the things that we do for our partner cities and counties is help to post and circulate job descriptions for future roles that you all may have amongst our alumni who have been through the transition from the private sector and that really strategic, get things done attitude and mindset, and have made that effective transition to local government. Many have stayed on in local government. I said most first because either they have stayed on within the departments that they are in, or similar departments, or departments in other jurisdictions. Others take on local government consulting and have continued to do that for years post their fellowship. So the 180,000 breaks down to everything you get for the year and long before the year. So all of the conversations with us to scope the project development, finalizing the project description, posting across all platforms, everything that our recruiting does for the executive search. So part of the reason that I shouted out my recruiting team colleagues and that we have 40 to 50 applications at this point is because they not only do active searching, looking for folks who are currently looking for roles, but they also do passive searching. So looking for folks who have exactly the skill set you need and for exactly the project that we've set out in other places. So folks may actually be leaving a private sector or other role because of their commitment to supporting you all in this project. It then covers all executive coaching for that fellow, all program support, all of the support that the fellow receives throughout the year, as well as the support that your team directly receives from our program team throughout the year. Then, of course, incentivizes the fellow through a salary and benefits, and then ensures that you all have that continuity throughout the year. So if for any reason there was not quite the right fit, doesn't happen often, our recruiting team really is good, but whenever that does happen, we do ensure that you still get the deliverables within that 12-month period. We will make sure of that. So that's why kind of the 180,000, again, it is not for kind of a short-term commitment. It is embedding an outside skill set into the department, and then you your decisions on, if it is the right fit, bringing that person in-house if that's the right option for you, extending them to a second year if that's the right option for you, or having it be the great time to transition over and continue the work in-house. I would say just the only other thing I would add there is and I'm happy to send these over, have several impact stories and several current fellows who are working on public safety, 911 diversion. For example, a fellow that just began in Baltimore, who is doing a lot of the pieces of work that you all are looking for in Baltimore. And so it was great to hear Major Hilliard from Baltimore, and I'm sure that they have either connected or had the opportunity to hear of each other. So a lot of times, Fuse fellows are in the position of kind of project managing, taking the lead, taking the charge on a new issue area of work, an emerging area, moving that forward in partnership with other contractors, other fellows, other senior and junior fellows. So that is very much a role that Fuse fellows are used to playing because of that executive search where we can find exactly the skill set that you need.
And I just wanted to quickly say we've already had those scoping calls with Mayor Biss and other members of the Reimagining Committee, as well as Councilmember Reed. And again, we had a meeting today as well. So, and I don't, there was quite a bit of, there was a few documents that I don't see included in the packet. And one of those documents that I wanted added had a breakdown of the 180,000. But just to recap again, it's not just salary, benefits, training, executive coaching, et cetera. So it's really a full package that even the city of Evanston should provide to all employees. We've talked about that, providing people with the training that they need and the coaching. So it's not just salary, just to be clear. Councilmember Hadikotis, I know you have.
I had just two quick questions for Nicole. And you started to touch upon a couple of these things. I was just curious, is it possible for us to see some of the candidate pool, considering you folks are actively recruiting for the Evanston Post? And then the other thing, I think I would be really interested in reading about some of the other fellows and other locales, what they're doing. I think that'd be an interesting piece of information to have for us. So.
Yep, absolutely. We can do both. And typically at this point in the recruitment phase, we would send you blind resumes. So without the name, we just don't want to bias the process, but without the name so that you get a sense of some of the experience they've had.
That'd be great. Thanks.
And I can tell you from the Housing Fuse Fellow, we did get a preview of the candidates, and it's a really impressive group. Again, I really want to stress that the difference between, I think, what people typically think when they think about a Fuse Fellow is like a college, intern, or these are people who have been working in this field for at least 15 years. These are executive level professionals, which is why I appreciate, and we've talked about the need to, we have a compensation and staffing levels report that we'll get back soon that'll probably tell us that we need to pay people more. And so, again, this is a competitive salary, which is why we have 45 to 50, and I think it should be. This is important work. It's difficult work because you not only need to be well organized and understand policy, but again, this person is going to be on the front line of bringing these issues to the community, to the public, and to us as on the council, as well as our police department in partnership with LEAP. So this is a big job, and but I know Fuse can provide that information for you, Councilman Hadikotis. Thank you.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to say is, just to get this out there, I have been on numerous calls with city staff, and again, I know it's not just challenging for our city, but other cities, and they have talked about the difficulty of hiring. And so I am someone who I like to have very real and upfront conversations. We can, on one end, say it's difficult to hire and we have vacant positions and it's tough hiring for especially some of our higher level positions within the city, and then say, I think we can do it, no problem. No, I don't think we can do it that well right now. And this process has allowed us to slow down the process, bring in folks like myself and Mayor Biss and others from the Reimagining Public Safety Committee to really scope out the job description, which I think is an important initial step to make sure we're very clear about the work that we want someone to do. And they've brought us along this process, and that process is what leads to the 45 to 50 pool, because I would imagine we don't necessarily have 45 to 50 people interested every time we make a job posting. But it's their process that has led to all of that, starting with the really bringing those stakeholders together, not just elected officials, but also community members. And so, again, this allows us to not get caught up in trying to do something that we haven't had the greatest success with. Let's leave it to an organization that has success, that has already started the process. And again, both of these Fuse fellows, but just talking about this one, can be working here in Evanston by October. So, let's get to work. And we already have 45 to 50 people in queue, waiting for the opportunity. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. With that, if there's no further discussion, we have a motion on the floor that has been moved and seconded. I will call for a voice vote. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Any? Would you like a roll call on this? Any abstentions? The ayes have it.
The minutes should reflect the roll call, Mr. Chairman, because it's about spending money.
Okay. Then we will do a roll call. Councilmember Heracles?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
No.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
And myself, Councilmember Reed, is an aye. Thank you.
And Chair, between this meeting and next, I would like our city manager to come back with, and our HR department to come back with how much it costs us to hire for these types of positions, what that total cost is for recruitment, salary, benefits, et cetera. So the next city council meeting, Chair, if you could work with City Manager Stowe as well as our HR department.
Yeah, it's moving straight to council.
And it would be very helpful to have, just be able to see the resumes of these applicants for both of the Fuse projects.
Yeah, I think, that'll be shared with us, and Councilmember Burns can share that with the committee. I'll share it with the committee. And then, yes, we will work to get that information before the council meeting. So thank you for that. We will move through the rest of our agenda, hopefully with haste, with appropriate haste. So that brings us to HS1, Ordinance 81022, amending City Code Section 957, publications inciting riots or physical violence. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I hear Councilmember Ravel moved that, and then seconded by Councilmember Burns. So this is in line with some of the ordinances that we have seen before. This ordinance, I don't think there have been any arrests. Maybe there was one arrest for it, but in the last few years. But this is potentially a law that's on the books that's just waiting to be a lawsuit, and I think provides the city with some legal exposure, and so I'd like to see us remove this piece of code from our ordinance books. I don't know if there's any further discussion on that, or if we can just keep moving. So, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, any abstentions, the motion passes. That brings us down to items for discussion. And that would be the first item up would be the Victim Services Fund. I'm sorry, is it Greg? I apologize. From the from the Health and Human Services Department.
Yes. Hello, council member. Yeah, it's Greg.
Yes. Hi, Greg.
Olson,
Mr. Olson.
Correct.
Yes. So Director Ogbo is not available today. I believe he's on vacation, and so Greg Olson is here in his stead. And so our first item for discussion is, as I said, the Victim Services Fund. So if you want to start, Greg, with a bit of a description on.
Sure. So again, my name's Greg Olson. I'm the Public Health Manager for the Health and Human Services Department. filling in for the director, Ike Ugbo, who's on a much-needed vacation, much deserved. And so when it comes to the Victim Services Fund, allocation, the Health and Human Services Department is committed to incorporating the needed social services to ensure that victims
We lost you, Greg. I think you muted. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. So in order for us to achieve the goal of ensuring that victims are treated with utmost fairness, dignity, and respect, we work within a number of systems throughout the city to provide access to temporary housing, mental health referrals, transportation, assistance with utility and food. So in 2019, the city conducted a social services review, and it actually recommended that all the social services should be combined within the Health and Human Services Department. And this combination of the social services, it resulted in the creation of a dedicated human services fund. So during the 2020 budget season, all the social services programs were moved out of the general fund and into the separate human services fund. This fund was created as a dedicated property tax levy for social services, salaries, and programs. And so providing this dedicated fund has allowed our social services programs to continue with a more secure source of funding rather than having to compete with other departments during the budget season within the general fund. The Human Services Fund that had the adopted budget for 2022 had approximately $3.7 million, of which 120,000 was designated for the expense line other program costs. And so this line item, other program costs, it allows us to use flexibility in our spending in order to support the victim services and the programs. So as I mentioned earlier, this flexibility can be temporary housing, food assistance, clothing, transportation. It's a number of different items. And then between 2021 and 2022, the department records have indicated that only $17,000, a little over $17,000 has been spent so far on the victim assistance and services. And also the program cost allocations for the Human Services Fund, it's separate from other funding sources within the health department. So, for example, we have funding sources for assisting our residents who are most vulnerable, such as our general assistance programs and our emergency assistance program, as well as community assistance funds and the community relief program, which was created to help Evanston's undocumented residents. That's basically how the victim services funds are allocated. So I would be happy to answer any questions. If I can't, I'll do my best to answer them, but if I can, I'll definitely discuss these with our Director of Health, Ike Ugbo.
Yeah, thank you for that. I certainly have questions, but I'll first open it up to the committee if there are any questions. If not, I will jump in. So one, it seems as though we have a very healthy, if you will, reserve balance with our Human Services Fund. Again, to understand correctly, there's at the beginning of the year, there's about $3.7 million in the fund, and we are anticipated only spending about $120,000. Is that about correct?
Well, the $120,000, that's for the line item other program costs. So that's just a portion of the $3.7 million. That doesn't include, I believe that does not include salaries or anything like that. That's just funding for providing the services, providing the food assistance, the temporary housing, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And just as a quick follow-up, also the victim services support programs comes out of that 120 is the way you think about it, or how should we be thinking about the 120,000 as it relates to the Victim Services Fund?
You know, I'm not entirely sure. I would have to get back with Ike on that one. But I would assume that it would be the 120,000 is the support for the actual services of the program. But I'll run this by Ike.
Okay. I think that's the case. I'm just reading. It says the other program cost allocation allows for the flexibility of using funds to support victim services and programs. That's what it says after it says 120,000 is designated for other program costs. I just wanted to, yeah, so if you can verify it, confirm that, that would be helpful.
Will do.
Thank you, Councilmember Ravel.
Well, as I interpret this memo, the money in the other program costs is funding that's available to provide to victims to help when they've had some kind of a disaster, emergency, to be able to provide for housing, et cetera. It does not include the salary for our victim services.
Correct.
Yeah.
Staff, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
so this is just a little snapshot of what we're trying to do there.
Yeah, and so the reason I've asked for this to be discussed, I specifically want to hear, I feel like I'm pretty loud, I don't know why, but I specifically want to hear what are the qualifications for someone to be eligible for the Victim Services Fund, relief funds, particularly because I've had some residents who, you know, were maybe not eligible for it, for assistance through the Victim Services Fund, as well as I want to make sure that we're promoting this as best as possible. For example, there was just a fire that took place in my ward, and you know, the victims there were not aware of the Victim Services Fund, as best as I could tell from conversations I had with folks after canvassing the apartment building. And I remember a few years ago, before this term, you know, there's a Evanston employee who I think worked for Parks and Rec, and I think he took his salary of it might have been near Christmas or Thanksgiving or near some holiday, and he took his paycheck and donated it to a family who had survived a fire. And I mean, wonderful for that guy to do that, but should he have to? You know, shouldn't we have resources available already? So one, if Greg, if you can help answer this, is one, what are the eligibility criteria? You know, do you have to be the victim of violence, or can you be a victim of something like a fire?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's important to distinguish what fund is for what incidents. So victim services fund, that's primarily for victims of crime or witnesses that need to seek social services. In the event of a fire or some unforeseen situation such as that would be more aligned with the emergency assistance program, and that is headed up by our another division within the Health and Human Services Department. Now, off the top of my head, I do not know the specific requirements, but yeah, in the event of a fire, that would be sort of the funds that we can use. But victim services, that's primarily to assist individuals who are victims of a crime or witness of.
Yeah, and specifically for a victim of a crime that I had in my ward where they weren't eligible, as a mother, you know, went through a terrible loss where her son murdered her daughter, his sister, and this happened within their house, and the mother reached out to me and shared, you know, reasonable concerns about, you know, having herself and her children remain in the house where this horrific incident had happened, and needed assistance, you know, temporarily relocating as they attempted to sell the house. And I personally can't imagine the mental anguish of a mother and her children, again, being in a house where something as horrific as that took place. And I connected her with our victim services, and they were not eligible for these funds. And in situations like that, I would just love to see us, maybe expand our eligibility criteria to, include, not just direct danger, that somebody might come back and, shoot the place up or something along those lines, but, the mental health, I think we should take mental health into consideration as we continue to look at this. Councilmember Burns. She was already on.
From discussing that with you, I think the reason was because they are homeowners and they have a place to live, and so this essentially would be subsidizing a home that they don't need because they're not under any real danger in their current home that they own and that they can stay in. And obviously I understand why in those situations you would want to relocate and get away for the moment. I think family, friends is an option for a getaway. If we did expand it to include temporary relocation, I would want to either focus on or in addition to what you're describing, include relocating someone temporarily when their landlord wants to make improvements on the property and they're facing eviction.
Well, we're talking about the Victim Services Fund right now.
Again, still, I mean, it's.
Well, I certainly think that's a conversation for the emergency.
And I'm talking about the
other...
Victim Services Fund as well. If we're talking about relocating someone, because again, ultimately the individual has a place to stay. If they're under threat in that home, that makes sense to use these funds in that way. But if we are going to think about expanding it beyond, I think its original intent, I would like to include other things, other. Temporary relocation.
So you're saying that if someone is the victim of a crime and what? If someone's the victim of a crime and their landlord, the property owner, what?
I would want to look into other ways to assist people that the city can assist in temporarily relocating someone. Because again, I think the reason why it was denied is because they have a home, and the home isn't under threat at all, and they're not under threat of losing it nor in any danger if they stay in the home. And so we would be essentially subsidizing a getaway, which is understandable under these circumstances.
I wouldn't call it a getaway. Again, this is
I didn't say a holiday getaway, I just said a getaway. Creating distance between the space that is traumatizing you and where you are, which is understandable. I'm not saying what type of getaway, but it is essentially a getaway. And
connotation of the word.
Okay. And so that's it. I just would want to, I think that opens it up to other uses as well, maybe even others that I haven't thought of yet. So that I just would want us to have that full conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that. What I would love to see is the actual program guidelines, and I was expecting that hopefully in the packet, but we can receive that later, the program guidelines. And, I just want us to expand it to allow broader application of these funds, to include, as I said, of course, we know that if there's the threat of direct violence, of someone coming back around to the house and threatening violence, we want to offer relocation there. But I also think we should take mental health into consideration as well. Councilmember Ravel.
Excuse me. I'd like us to think about how we might help people who have a major fire in their home, and how do they find out about what service, what support is available, and is that something that the fire department should be providing?
Yeah, I spoke with our health director after this fire. It is the fire department because they're first on the scene. Right. But what I spoke to Director Ogbo about is the health department creating a pamphlet that the firefighters could have on hand to victims of fires, so they know, here's, the emergency assistance grant, here's, these various grants that can make funds, where the city can make funds available. And certainly I want to have that conversation about emergency assistance to make sure that victims of, fires are very clearly, because right now, and we certainly should rely on partnerships wherever possible, to get the most bang for our buck. But right now we are heavily reliant on Catholic charities whenever there's a fire, and they help temporarily relocate folks, and I think that's a great service. But I think where there are gaps, I'd love to see us be able to, step in and fill those gaps. Councilmember, Ravel,
And just
Okay.
I want to make sure that they don't have to go through major hoops to be able to get whatever funds are they need.
So I suppose we'll get a check-in on that with Director Ogbo fairly soon. Is that correct, Greg? Or do you have a? Okay.
Correct. Yeah, I'll bring these notes back with Director Ugbo and make sure that the questions you guys addressed will be answered.
Councilmember Hedekatis, and then Councilmember. Oh, okay. Councilmember Burns.
I just wanted to make sure to highlight something someone said, I don't know, a moment ago, but just making sure that in doing that research, we explore other funding sources like Catholic Charities, FEMA, and others in different scenarios, and really dig into what that onboarding experience is like. And it's not the word I'm looking for. What is the case management word I'm looking for? No, it's something else. Intake. There it is. What the intake process is like. How long it takes and what they're experiencing. Because I think when possible, similar to the earlier discussion we had about alternative police responses, that when possible, we want to rely on other sources of funding, non-city sources of funding. So I would like to learn more about those options.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion on this item, then staff has the marching orders on what we'd like to see. We will move on to the next order of business, which is HS2 under items for discussion, which is the Food Peddlers Ordinance. So I requested a discussion on the Food Peddlers Ordinance last summer. The council approved allowance of food peddlers and mobile food vendors that are not food trucks at our lakefront and beaches. And I have since had conversations with a number of these vendors who have said that they have been charged what seems like over what our ordinance calls for. Our ordinance, and Greg, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but our ordinance, from my reading, said that there is a $50 fee to become a peddler. Is that correct?
Yes, that's in one portion, yeah, but regarding Health and Human Services and food safety, we classified a food peddler as a seasonal food establishment since they operate less than 6 months out of the year. And based on that definition, we charged them with a seasonal rate, which was $274.
So that's on top of the $50 or separate of the $50?
No, in place of the $50.
So you're relying on 867 for that, and I'm sorry. Let's see. Do you know what section of 867 are you relying on for that fee, the $274? $274. Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
So the seasonal food establishment, it's right at section A, 867 section A on the bottom. It'll say seasonal food establishments, and it lists 225. However, the license fees are subject to change based on the Cook County Consumer Price Index.
Yeah, okay. How do we define, okay, a food establishment is defined as
there's the definition of the seasonal food establishment under 862, I apologize. And that is a food establishment that operates for no more than 6 months out of the calendar year.
What is the definition?
And the menu.
What is the definition of an establishment? To me, it feels like an establishment would be like a brick and mortar location. And maybe we can.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, food establishment, it all depends on the type of risk that they have, which is based on the food preparation. Food establishment is, it can be a gas station, a grocery store, a long-term care facility, but also a food establishment is, there's temporary food establishments. So that's what this falls into. You have the temporary food establishment, which is an operation like at a city fair, where they don't operate for more than 14 days. They get a permit, we inspect to make sure the food's coming from safe places. And then there's the seasonal food permit, which it's longer than 2 weeks, but not longer than 6 months.
Yeah. So I think we've done something wrong here. I think we have crossed wires a bit, and I think what we need to do is one. I think the $50 fee is what we should be charging folks based on the code. Because that's the point of the the peddler's license to be a low barrier to entry. For example, Chicago has a similar license, and their license is $100. You pay $100, and you're able to operate your push cart. The difference is that in Chicago, their ordinance does specify that you must be operate out of a food establishment, right? You must be connected to a brick and mortar business in order to sell, your peddled goods. But in our ordinance doesn't. So I think we need to make that adjustment to make sure. And I think almost all of the operators that we have now, there's Gabi, who operates Four Sons Juice, and she has an establishment, and she has the push cart. And so, with the establishment, should she pay for the push cart the same fee that she's paying for a brick and mortar business to operate? And I don't think so. I think that's the point of this license, to create a low barrier opportunity. There's a coffee group. I'm forgetting the name of their coffee company, but they operate on the lakefront as well. That seems like a fairly low risk. I mean, unless they've got like cream and stuff out there, but that's fairly low risk as well. And again, should they be paying the same as a brick and mortar? And then I've seen, ice cream push cart folks out operating along the lakefront, and that's prepackaged, food, fairly safe. And so again, I just want to make sure that we're in alignment. I don't know if if you don't mind being put on the spot, Dirk, do you have any opinion on the meaning of the word establishment and whether that typically means a physical location versus like a push cart?
Well, mobile food dispensing, whether it's food trucks, push carts, and all the rest, is a highly charged issue. So I don't know what it means in your code. I wouldn't want to speculate.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Yeah, I would just want us to look into it. And then my communication with Ike was that we would either, for future licenses apply, if anyone did pay over what they should be paying, that we'd apply, if someone paid the $275 now, that we'd apply that to their next few licenses or offer refunds. I am happy to, I think if the department is willing to move that direction and, we can come back with a few code amendments to make sure that businesses are operating out of, licensed food establishments, whether that be, folks in Illinois are now allowed to have cottage food establishments for certain, and that's a cottage food establishment is operating out of your house with very limited guidelines in what you're able to sell. And so, that would, and that's, I think, a $50 license as well, or somewhere along those lines. And so I think, as long as they have a regulated food production operation, whether it be the cottage food operation or, a commercial kitchen, as long as they're connected to that, I think we should allow them to pay the $50. And of course, they would, under the cottage food laws, have to, disclose everything relevant to the cottage food laws. But I want us to move in that direction. And so, and I know you're not the director, Greg, but certainly I guess we'll continue conversations with Director Ogbo on this, because my reading of the food establishment seems as though it would not apply to these to the push cart peddlers.
Yeah, and I think anything food related typically always followed the city code of the HHS, and I think that was the confusion where we followed the food licensing as opposed to the, I guess, business licensing of the food peddler. So I know just solely based on what Ike has written in his memo that if the law department determines that we incorrectly followed the wrong ordinance, then we'll 100% make those changes. And like you already mentioned, council member, that any fees that need to be adjusted can be applied to future annual fees for those vendors.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess the next step is to have the law department look at this and come to a conclusion. Okay. Then that is the order, and then we'll follow up offline on this, and hopefully be able to refund those business owners or apply it to future payments that they would remit to the city. Okay. Moving on with our agenda, that brings us to items for communication. And we'll start with to allow Greg to go on with your day. We'll take the MPV update first, and then since Chief Eddington is here in person, I think he's just used to sitting around here for a while, we'll go to that last, and then we'll be done with the meeting. Okay, we'll do the, may I have a motion to accept and place on file the MPV update from the Human Services Committee?
I'll make that motion.
Moved by Councilmember Hericales, seconded by Councilmember Ravel. So I asked for this to be placed on the agenda as well. We know that it's a misnomer of types, the monkeypox. It actually is spread through rodents more To know, we'd still appreciate your presence in person if you'd like, but Councilmember Hadikatis was able to make it today. Okay, we are ready to get started, so I will call the meeting to order. We'll do a quick roll call. Councilmember Hadikatis? Here. Councilmember Ravel?
Here.
Safer forms of sex. I do want to understand, and the reason is our vaccine availability. I know that the Chicago Health Department is working on gaining access to, or has access to, vaccine. And I'm curious, does the city of Evanston, do we plan on having access to the vaccine, and how do we plan on distributing the vaccine?
Yes, so as a certified public health department, we are allowed to get allocated vaccines like we were for COVID-19. However, there is a supply limitation right now with the monkeypox vaccine, and IDPH has directed us to work with Cook County at this time. So anytime we have a close contact or an individual who is eligible to receive the vaccination, we coordinate vaccination services right now through Cook County. We're hoping to get allocated vaccines in the future so the process can be a little bit quickened. We've been working with local providers, the Erie Health Center, to act as a site, a vaccination site, because currently as it stands, the vaccination site that in Cook County would have to go to is about 45 minutes away from here, which has been very, yeah, it's just not very conducive to getting the vaccination. And yeah, everything you said so far about the vaccine has been correct. There's been 7 cases in Evanston right now. And while anybody can get the monkeypox virus, transmission at this time has mainly been with patients who identify as gay, bisexual, or men who have sex with other men. So because of that and the limited supply, an individual, in order for them to be eligible to receive the vaccine, they either have to be a close contact themselves with someone who is diagnosed with the monkeypox virus, or they need to be part of the gay, bisexual, and men who have sex with other men, and 18 or older, because currently the vaccine is only approved by the FDA for individuals 18 or older. And it would be individuals who have had multiple or anonymous sex partners, they've engaged in sex at a social venue, or they've had sex in exchange for money or goods within the last 2 weeks. And on the call, we have Elizabeth Lassiter. She's our communicable disease specialist. She was anytime I have a chance to tote her ability, that I have to take advantage of it, because Elizabeth was absolutely a superstar when it came to our response to COVID-19, and she's continuing these efforts into monkeypox. So Elizabeth can kind of go through and talk about our ongoing planning that we have and our preparedness activities that are ongoing.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know you were on the call, Elizabeth. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the introduction. So just briefly, I want to let you know that we do have an internal planning team. So we meet regularly to talk about any updates that have come out. And I'll go through a list of some of the things that our work focuses on there. So of course, one of the things we do is closely monitor and maintain situational awareness. Anything that comes up that's new from CDC or IDPH, we need to make sure that we're aware of that new guidance and then train staff accordingly. We're also engaging partners. Greg already listed some of those, Erie, other local clinics, as well as our local health departments. We've really strengthened relationships with them, just trying to all learn together again during this response, similar to what we did with COVID at the beginning. We're responsible for interviewing monkeypox cases, our MPV cases that reside within Evanston. So we give them guidance on isolation, help coordinate treatment if that's indicated. We also work with close contacts, as Greg mentioned, and try to make sure that they're aware of the disease, symptoms to watch for, and then also coordinate vaccine if they're eligible. We're responding to inquiries from the community, from clinicians, asking about testing. Schools and daycares are concerned as well. Just all kinds of general inquiries that we're getting. We help respond to those. And then lastly, just trying to communicate to the public at large. We've got a monkeypox page on the city webpage. And I know in the newsletters that come out every week, as well as the LGBTQ newsletter, we've sent out some messaging there as well.
Thank you. I have two questions, or one question actually. Do you know how many folks we've been able to vaccinate? I know that you expressed that we've had 7 confirmed positive cases, which I also know that it's really hard to get a confirmed positive case because you have to swab the still, the postulating pox in order to confirm, that it is MPV. So do we know how many suspected cases we've had outside of those 7 that we have confirmed? And then do you know how many folks we've been able to vaccinate?
So in terms of close contacts, I'd have to look. We have had multiple close contacts that we've arranged through Cook County. And then we've had a number of other individuals that have met the criteria that Greg reviewed, where they're high-risk individuals but don't have known exposure to a case. We've also helped coordinate vaccinations there, but I'm not sure how many appointments have been made.
And we are sending folks to Erie. Is that correct? I heard Greg say that for vaccination.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. So Erie is just our health partner, but we're not doing vaccinations with Erie yet.
Correct. Yeah, we're still working through Cook County, but we are trying to work with our local partners to establish a clinic within the city, so individuals don't have to drive 45 minutes away to get the vaccine.
Okay. And we don't have and what about partnering with Chicago as a health department who has access to the vaccine? I know they have a very limited, I think they're, I don't know if it's 1,500 or 15,000, I forget. It was 15 something. And so I know they have limited vaccine, but is that a possibility? Have we partnered with Chicago? I'd imagine that their site is closer than 45 minutes.
Yeah, Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that only Chicago residents are eligible to receive the vaccination through Chicago. Is that still correct?
That was what we were initially hearing for a long time. I think recently it has been expanded. The city of Chicago does receive a separate allocation from the rest of the state of Illinois. So for a while, when supply was even more limited than it is now, there were restrictions on residency in some jurisdictions, including Chicago. I think it has been expanded, and I know some residents that I've spoken to, they've said that they've been able to find vaccinations there.
Yeah, I would love to be a part of, as the Chair of Human Services now, a part of the meetings on our response to monkeypox, to MPV, and certainly would love to see us try to work with Chicago. Health. We're one of 3 or 4 certified health departments that municipalities have in the state. Let's see if we can build some health department to health department camaraderie and work with that jurisdiction to make the vaccination more convenient for Evanston residents. And then,
Yep, definitely. I think one of the good things that came out of COVID-19, kind of what Elizabeth mentioned, is that it really strengthened our partnerships with our community organizations, our nonprofits, and also our surrounding health departments. We would have weekly calls with Cook County, Skokie, all the certified Chicago as well. So yeah, we're definitely trying to leverage our relationships right now to make sure that vaccinations are as easy to get as they can be.
Yeah, and to close this discussion out, I think this is a really important lesson on the new global nature of the spread of viruses. I think America had a national reserve of millions of doses of the smallpox vaccine, and we let, I believe, if my memory is correct, 20 million doses expire, while in Africa there were folks who monkeypox was still very much a thing, and it is still a thing in Africa. And had we made those 20 million doses that now are expired, we may not be experiencing the increase of cases here. We live in a much smaller world than we did, even 50 years ago, but certainly 100 years ago. And we need to start acting like it because we have people here in small Evanston that are now suffering because we could not be good global neighbors and provide excess vaccine that we had to our neighbors in particularly Western Africa, Nigeria, and other countries. So it is a shame that we're here, but hopefully Evanston can respond as best as we can, and that's why we had this discussion. And thank you, Greg and Elizabeth, if I said that correctly. Thank you both for your time, and we will continue on. Chief Eddington, that brings us to item HS1 and HS2. So we'll start with item HS1.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate your time this evening. I wanted to highlight a research effort that's been undertaken by the Evanston Police Department.
Oh, my apologies. I want to close the loop. We did not vote to actually accept and place that on file. So all those in favor say aye, and this is going back to the MPV update.
Aye.
All those opposed, any abstentions? Great. And then may I have a motion to, this is also to accept and place on file HS1, a motion for that?
Make the motion.
Moved by Councilmember Hedekadis, seconded by Councilmember Burns. Chief Eddington, the floor is yours, sorry.
Thank you. No problem, sir. I wanted to call to your attention an effort undertaken by the Evanston Police Department to enhance our police community relations. I had preferred that Deputy Chief Wright do the presentation this evening, but due to a family conflict, he was unavailable. I anticipate he will be here to give you updates as this research progresses. I want to mention the two researchers are Kyle Dobson, a postdoctorate fellow at the University of Texas, and Andrea Dittman, an assistant professor at Emory University. They were both undergraduates at Northwestern, and in 2019, then Chief Demetrius Cook brought them in to do some research on police-citizen interactions. From that research, they have developed what they term as a transparency statement. This is an introduction, a way for the officer to make a statement that's tailored to him or her in the setting of police community relations to introduce themselves, say what's going on, and get that done very quickly. That way it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the conversation. When they do that and it's effective and tailored to the officer, it increases the positive interaction rate. It also increases the likelihood of follow-on positive interactions down the road, even if it's not between the same citizen and same police officer. So we're excited about this. Part of the future training in this, and we're working with the Corporation Council on this, is an arrangement regarding body-worn camera footage so that the individual officer's body-worn camera footage would be reviewed by the researcher and the officer as kind of a individual critique of how they're doing, what they did well, what could be improved. And so all those things, all those moving parts are in process, and I have high hopes for this taking off and having some positive results.
Thank you. If there are no questions on that, then all those in favor of accepting and placing this update on file, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. All right, then that brings us one last item. This is the last item of the evening. And a quick question after this, but the item is, I'm sorry, I clicked away from the agenda, but it is HS 3 or 2
Police
on
staffing.
Yeah, on the police staffing.
Yes, yes. This is a multiple topic discussion or information. First, I want to start off with new recruit testing. I want to highlight the efforts of the HR department in that they have taken several significant steps, in my opinion, to widen out who could conveniently take the test. This is the first time that the HR has worked with an online test. This is the first time we've also used the power test card from NIPSTA and other testing agencies that says that the individual taking the test has passed a physical fitness test that makes them eligible to enter a police academy in the state of Illinois. And so that's before we had the written test and the power test on specific dates. If you had a conflict or you had a flat tire or something went wrong, you were out. This way, it broadens that opportunity. We had 30 people take the test. I apologize. We had 31 people take the test, 30 passed. I think that's, in the hiring context of what we're doing, it was not unusual in the past to have 250 to 300 people take these tests. And so that hiring pool has significantly shrunk. We, working with HR, will endeavor to interview these people and get them through the pre-test, the psychologicals, the polygraphs, and the backgrounds. And so we hope we'll get some of them into basic training in the late fall of this year. In the context of staffing, it takes us about 18 to 24 months to build a policeman. And so we once they take the test, the clock's running. We really don't anticipate help from those folks in the next 18 months. We're also have an additional 6 lateral officers have applied. Those backgrounds and interviews will start shortly, and as we work quickly to attempt to plug in those experienced officers into our staffing to help those issues. Currently, we have 26 vacancies for sworn officers. We have 6 civilian vacancies. One of the other numbers that you don't hear frequently is those officers on light duty. And that means they're not able to go out on the road for various reasons. Off-duty injuries, on-duty injuries, surgeries, the whole gamut of reasons, but there are 10 officers in that status. So in essence, for answering calls, getting the patrol work done, we're light 36 people. And so that in large part contributed to the reassignment of the crime prevention unit, and it is my hope that within these next 60-day period, we can backfill these positions and begin to reassign people to that unit. Mr. Chairman, are there any questions I can answer?
Yeah. Thank you for that. So how does this compare to other municipalities? From your knowledge, I know Chicago is down thousands of officers. Is Skokie, is Wilmette, is Winnetka? Are these communities also seeing a similar pattern? Or is this a nationwide pattern, or is this something that's, kind of isolated to communities like Evanston, like Chicago?
I think there is a nationwide pattern of difficulty in recruiting police officers. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that's different about the larger departments, they have larger problems. If you look at Seattle, they're down significant number of officers to the point where Seattle is completely restructuring bonus incentives and other issues to attempt to address that shortage. And so we find ourselves in that group of larger cities that have bigger problems. The surrounding suburbs may be short a couple of officers, but not at these percentage levels that we are.
Are we able to, I would just love to get in some kind of numbers and analysis of what some of our neighbors are facing, because I think it might be informative as to how we can move forward with being more attractive if we know, if Wilmette isn't experiencing, or Kenilworth isn't experiencing the issues that we are, is it just because they're a smaller community with a smaller police force and not the same level of complexity that a city like Evanston has, or is it because they're offering some great incentive package that maybe we need to be offering, or retention package? And so I'd just love to see what our neighboring and comparable communities are dealing with, so we can steal ideas in a legal way, steal ideas from them to retain folks here and to attract new hires. And then So there was really helpful information on what is, so we had 20 some odd, how many retirements did we have in the last, year or two?
3.
We had 3 retirements, and then,
In this year, sir.
In this year.
In this year.
And then how many folks transferred to other police departments again?
I believe it was 5 or 6.
Oh, yeah, I'm saying, okay, 6 resignations, 3 retirements, 5 new hires, and then 3. So when did this, so it seems like this year we've only lost 9 people? Not only, but this year we've lost 9 people. And then last year, do you know how many people we lost?
Well, in the total shortages, it's 26.
Yeah. I just want to understand maybe how much of this shortage is, because we hear in the media quite often, and the police department has expressed certainly that, or members of the police department have expressed that, in part that the protests that took place post George Floyd in communities like Evanston, particularly here, played a role in officer morale. One, do you think that's a correct assessment?
Yes.
Okay, yes. And so I'm curious just to understand how many of these vacancies are just kind of a natural part of our operations, and then what part of the vacancies, can we more so attribute to the post murder of George Floyd world?
Of the vacancies we're talking about, 3 were retirements. Everybody else is working for another law enforcement agency. So I would say 23 are directly related to that sentiment, at least in part. There are other issues. There are always personal issues, working closer to home, better pay scales, but the events particular to Evanston had an impact on many of those 23 officers deciding to take their talents to another Metro Chicago law enforcement agency.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I expressed this to Deputy Chief Secludi. I plan to attend a few of the roll calls in the near future to try to build some of those relationships between the at least the community that I represent and law enforcement, because I think that is critical, and I think that the folks who remain, I'm hoping that the folks that remain are the folks that are most committed to our reimagining work, and just as I think we as both electeds and community members and folks who folks who are on the other side looking for reform in the way that government mandates policing, I think we need to humanize each other, both from the community standpoint, our law enforcement, to make sure that we understand that you folks are humans, and the situations that we often place law enforcement in without proper training and proper resources, and I'm not talking about, again, we know that there's a murder of, or not a murder, that there's a shooting of a 13-year-old girl, there's a murder of another resident. All of that stuff has to weigh on human beings and being in situations where your life and safety is at threat. And so I want to make sure that our officers know that they are supported and cared for, but also that at the same time that the calls from the community to reimagine policing and to rethink the way we deploy law enforcement who are trained with firearms, that we rethink the way that we deploy those folks, both to support our sworn officers as well as our community. Councilmember Burns.
I just wanted to quickly say that I don't think it is necessarily the policies that were discussed during that time as much as it was the political kind of unrest that came out of it. But and so part of the issue is that, to me, it's incumbent on us up here to move, as again Major Hillard said, intelligent reforms through the process quickly so that we can address a lot of the unrest that's created from from people saying, look, there are areas where this government can improve its how it achieves public safety and community wellness that it's not doing, and our ability to move quickly through that, to acknowledge what we've heard from the community, to meet and debate the issues, but then to quickly move those reforms through the process, also can both limit, but also limit the need for protests and political unrest in the beginning. So I don't think it's necessarily just about the reforms. It's also on us. Like, let's move this stuff through the process. And I want to, put another plug to why it's important that we go beyond identifying like things that areas that we want to focus on, but that we have the staff support to move the work forward. It's not enough to just say, oh yeah, we that we want to do community responder, or we want to do this with traffic enforcement. Like, we need, in order to move through the process, there's community engagement needs that come with that. There are policy implications. There are budget implications to all these decisions, and we don't have any staff person whose job it is to sort through all of that on a regular basis. For most of what we do, we have we've only assembled volunteers to work on these issues for the most part. And so I just want to plug that it's not just about the reforms. The political unrest only, in my opinion, goes is we can reduce it and almost eliminate it if we pass the things that I think the community is asking us to pass. So I just want to put that on the record. Let's do the work. Let's acknowledge what the community has said they want to see. Let's do the work. Let's move it through the process. Vote on it. Implement it. I think we'll have a lot less political unrest.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you're not characterizing what I said as just about reform.
No. I'm just.
Yeah. And so, I appreciate that. And I agree. I think that is the urgency. I think that often when we talk about, that civil unrest, there are typically years and years of civil, peaceful protest before we get to that point. And we've seen it recently with, the women's rights movement related to abortion access, and, folks calling out the incivility of protesting outside of, Justice Kavanaugh's home. And it was years of peaceful protest before we got to that point. And similarly with the George Floyd protest, it was years of peaceful protest and demanding peacefully for change before, we saw that civil unrest. And so I think, yes, it is on us to, as government officials, as elected officials, to move quickly to implement civility in our policies, to make sure that civility in our policies is, then mirrored back with civility in the way that folks are protesting, injustice. And hopefully we are decreasing that. So thank you, Chief Eddington. I don't know if there's anything else that
you would be more than welcome to roll calls. Please stop by anytime. We're always open. Also, one quick comment on the LEAP search. I would implore the selection committee to look for someone who has real world experience with stuff that's worked in reforms. And once again, so many of these reforms are in the idea stages and not implemented. And I think
the theoretical stage.
I would want caution in and I will use just one example. Philadelphia, which has zero in common with us, basically rewrote their traffic stop policy. Unfortunately, one of the other unintended consequences was a significant rise in the homicide rate in Philly. Now, one of the things that was crazy about what Philly was doing was 80% of their tickets were equipment violations. That seems heavy-handed to me, but I don't know where the disconnect was. And I'm looking to whoever is retained in this capacity to have some experience in navigating through those issues, because you hear this good idea, but once the rubber meets the road, we wound up in a place we didn't want to be. And so I think that, and once again, I was swayed by the comments of people with a lot of experience, having done this before, can come in and analyze what's going on here in Evanston. and I'm certain the police staff will be supportive of that individual and provide them with the background they need to attempt to navigate this from an Evanston police perspective.
I just want to ask a clarifying question, because you mentioned Philadelphia rewriting their traffic stop policy, and so I imagine that seems like something that was done in the last few years. And the rise in violent crime also seems like that would be something happen. And so I just want to make sure that we're not drawing a potentially, false correlation between, a change in policy over here and then an increase, because we have seen nationally an increase in violent crime, particularly in murder and violent crime across the board. And so it seems like there's been, particularly since 2020, I believe that the data would show a national increase.
I think if you look more closely at the data, unfortunately, the violence is horrifically concentrated. And I think that's a factor that the experience we're soliciting from LEAP needs to be brought in and explore why that violence is so concentrated. And I think you need researchers with a great deal of experience and a great deal of political acumen to be able to navigate those waters.
And I just want to quickly say, LEAP is really going to focus more so on the community, expanding the community responder model. What you're talking about is a Fuse fellow, and Mayor Biss and I talked today with Fuse, and the plan is to have a member of our police department as part of the interview selection panel. And, so you can start to, if you could start to identify who that may be, whether it's you or the next person, right?
Well, I'm hoping not.
Exactly, or so whoever it is. But obviously more than welcome, and that's part of what I said earlier is making sure that we're working on these issues hand in hand as we move forward. So absolutely,
yes, sir. Thank you.
Good points.
Officer Geyer, as the union rep, might be a good person for that. Potential.
And I am hopeful that the next chief of police will be a valued member of that committee.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to the end of our agenda. I have one quick question for our next meeting. So our next meeting is, I'm believing, September 6th. That is because that Monday, September 5th, is Labor Day, and so we will hold our next meeting September 6th. And I just want to ask Council Price, there were a few items that were sent to the law department to Ansel Glink to review for that meeting, and so I just want to make sure that those items will be ready for that meeting, which is one, information, and Ms. Tappendorf would have, Julie will have all of this, but information on the topless ordinance, information on the distribution of the daily crime bulletin and research there. And I think there are a few other items that we can certainly connect. And then also, I guess, this update. And then I guess also an update on what we just voted on today, or what we discussed today regarding the food peddlers license. And so just want to put that on the radar for the September 6th meeting.
And if I could add, I watched the video of the Human Services meeting I missed in July, and there was apparently a memo from Ms. Tappendorf to the committee, I think on topless cases or something. Anyway, if she could send that, I did not receive that even.
Oh, okay. We'll make sure that's shared with you.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be updated based on the discussion at that last meeting.
Yeah, I have the one on the topless issue. I've got the crime bulletin, got the issue about the throwing of missiles.
Yeah.
I'll add this food truck discussion. I'm not clear what the question is, but we'll figure that out.
The question is.
I've got coming forward issues. You asked me to look at codification of Miranda. You asked me to look at, which I have that ready. You asked me to look at. What's the other one? Hold on. No knock warrants. That's ready.
Yeah, great. Oh, wonderful.
The one that's not ready because it's so multi-layered is the discussion about cannabis lounges. That requires us to go back to the nitty-gritty with planning in addition to law enforcement. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So the committee has a bit of foresight into what is coming up in the next few meetings. So thank you very much, Council Price. With no further business before us, I call this meeting adjourned at 7:28 p.m. Thank you.